Hey friends, before we dive into today's episode, we want to let you know that we'll be discussing some sensitive topics. If you've got little ears riding along in the back of the minivan, or if this isn't the right moment for you, feel free to hit pause and come back later. We'll be here when you're ready. May is Foster Care Awareness Month, and this episode we're going to do things a little differently. Instead of our usual format, I want to share my own story, my experience in foster care. It's a story that reflects the reality for so many children today, and it highlights the impact that you can have in their lives. But to tell my story, I'm going to hand over the hosting duties to someone else. I'm excited to welcome Ray Biggerstaff. He's our Director of Advocacy here at ChildBridge. Ray and his team are at the forefront of raising awareness about the urgent need for foster and adoptive families. Through initiatives like Awareness Sundays at churches, monthly virtual info meetings, they make it easier for people to take that next crucial step towards fostering. Welcome, Ray.
Well, Tricia, it is wonderful to talk with you today and to hear a little bit more about your story. I want to just get right into it. That's all right with you. Dive right into the deep end. Yeah. Tell us, Tricia, what was it like for you as a child to experience abuse and neglect? Take us through what that was like in the day-to-day experience for you.
Yeah, I think the best way to do that is just really take you back in time to a few of the memories that are really clear for me. The first one is just what the dinner table was like every night in our home. And, we had 4 young children in our home, and yet the dinner table was always silent. I mean, you could hear a pin drop because everyone was afraid to speak, or afraid if we might chuckle wrong or too loud that my dad would just explode. And I do remember one specific night. I don't recall who made the sound, likely me. I was kind of the family clown, probably joking around. But what I do remember is my dad just standing up quickly and flipping the table over and plates flying every which way, and him walking across the room and hurling my brother through the sliding glass door. I remember just being so afraid. I ran to the corner, and I now would name it that I was praying silently that just, please don't let him see me. Please just stop him from hurting my brother. So that's one example of kind of, I wish I could say that wasn't the everyday, but that happened fairly frequently. That's one specific memory. Another memory that just quickly pops into my mind is that of my 8th birthday. And I love my birthday, still do to this day, but the memory is just kind of seared in my mind. It was Sunday morning. It was my job to make my parents coffee. And my dad, he had these weird rules where the coffee grounds went on different days was different places. And I couldn't remember. I remember just racking my brain. Oh my gosh, am I supposed to put him in the garbage disposal? Am I supposed to put him in the garbage can? And I think it was just this excitement of my birthday that I just couldn't remember. What I do remember is that my dad made me eat the coffee grounds. I remember going to church and I remember feeling so sick all that day. And again, that really wasn't unusual in our home. The hardest part in my childhood, and the part, that if I'm honest is still a challenge for me, was the nighttime bedroom visits. And, my dad, whenever he was in the home, there was terror, there was fear. I was always afraid. But, when he was out and about in the house, I wasn't sure who was going to get hurt when. Would it be one of my other siblings? Would it be me? But when he snuck into my bedroom at night, I knew I didn't share a bedroom with anyone else. And so it was him that would sexually abuse me. And, to really just fully take you into what that's like. I mean, I was tiny. I was itty bitty. I mean, we're talking age 2 to 10. So really small child. And, this is just the most hard and most confusing part is my mom was in the home, but really was complicit in these things. She allowed these things to occur. And, as a mother now, I really, I can't actually wrap my mind around it. So that gives you a bit of the feel of what it was like. But gosh, if I can leave you with anything, it's this feeling of terror, just fear and terror. That's all I remember from my childhood.
Thank you for sharing that. And really, as I hear it, it's difficult to hear. It's difficult for me to hear, and I'm sure for others to hear. But that doesn't compare at all to what it would be like experiencing it. And this is your story. And so I thank you for sharing it and being vulnerable right now with us and sharing that. As a father, my reaction to that is I wish I could have been there to protect you, to keep you safe in those times, as your father was responsible to do and didn't do. That was God's plan for him, is to be the protector and provider for you, and he wasn't. And so I wish I could step in. That's my actual reaction. I'm sure we all have that feeling. But really, your story is a testimony of God's mercy. And I just thank you for sharing it and being vulnerable with us right now.
Yeah, Ray, can I press into that feeling you have as a
Please.
dad? And if there are dads that are listening that are having that reaction, I would say, hey, they're still little girls just like me, been harmed just like me today, that are in the foster care system. And if you're having that reaction, you might want to respond. I felt like I needed to add that there.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. And that's how I feel as well. And my story, and this isn't time to tell my story. My story has been, I've looked for opportunities to step in and intercede on behalf of children who've come from places much like you've come from when you were young. So yeah, thank you for adding that. I appreciate that. So Tricia, what I know of your story is that later on, as you got a little older, you did eventually enter the foster care system as a young teenager. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother set of circumstance I won't get into today. But yeah, some things that weren't good continued to happen in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us what it was like as a teenager being in foster care, and especially what it was like being in a Christian foster family.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I landed right straight into one, that one was available on day one. That's not the case. My story is bounced around through a lot of homes prior to the one that I'll talk about here in a minute, but probably somewhere in upwards, definitely more than a dozen, probably close to 20 different foster homes, and experienced a wide array of things, not all of them good, before one day a Christian family from my church. I belonged to a church, and they stepped forward into foster care. They got licensed specifically to take me into their home. I was living in a group home, and somebody picked me up and drove me to church. And the pastor gave this little icebreaker question: turn to your neighbor and tell them how the church has blessed you recently. And I remember I crossed my arms, turned to my neighbor sullenly and said, in no way whatsoever have they blessed me recently. And the reason I did that was because there was a lot of families in the church who had considered taking me in, and some of them told me they were considering it. They were praying about it. But in the end, each of them chose not to. So I was pretty angry. I was pretty mad. I was pretty frustrated. I'd been hurt, abused, rejected, and it was just this rejection heaped upon rejection. But that one day, that person that I turned to and I said that to was actually a teenage boy, and his name is Dan Hedman. And little did I know that the youth pastor had already been talking to this family about taking me in. That was unbeknownst to me. They were smart and didn't tell me they were considering it. And he went home and he told his parents of that one little 2-minute interaction. And that is part of the prompting that would cause them to step into foster care, get licensed specifically to take me into their home. So rather than being rejected, like had always happened to me, somebody was actually going to great lengths to care for me, to send me this new message of, no, 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 I choose you. You have been chosen. You are a daughter worth having. And, I think of it now as a parent, and I think of, my foster dad was paralyzed on half of his body. My foster parents, they had two teenage sons. And let me tell you, I was doing things you would not want your teenage sons around. And I just think of, they knew that light overcomes darkness, not the other way around. They knew that they would be bringing this light into my life, and they knew that these foster brothers would become brothers and protectors to me. And so, I often think my foster parents had so many rules for their kids who'd grown up in their own home, but for me, they had one rule. And this one rule was that I had to learn a scripture every single week that I was in their home. Typically, the way that would go down is I would spout that scripture back as I was headed out the back door to go do nonsense with people I shouldn't have been hanging around with. But I just love that my foster dad knew the word just doesn't return void. If he could get it inside of me, that one day it would really return. And I always like to say this Christian foster family changed not only my life, but my eternity and that of my own children. They really were handing me this new legacy. And, I think many people would think, a girl who comes into the foster care system around age 13 or 14, far gone, especially been through, 20 foster homes. And I just love that they weren't afraid. They weren't afraid to dream with me. They weren't afraid to just look at, I always think my foster dad, he saw all that that I had, and I had a lot of and I believe that he knew that if he sat, paralyzed in his lazy boy chair and prayed for me and deposited scripture into me, if we could just point all that in the right direction for God's purposes and God's passions, oh my goodness, what could God do? And I will forever be grateful that he could really see that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think we're also grateful hearing your story for the Hedmans, Rich and Ruth, and them being willing to say yes to you at that time, especially when they had all the reasons in the world to say no.
Yeah.
All the reasons to say, you know what, we already are parents of a teenage boy, right? Their own son was in the home, or this is a teenage girl with this background. We don't have the capacity for that. Or Rich with his disability you mentioned. That's a pretty good reason to say no.
Yeah.
It's okay to say no. You can give yourself the way out, but instead they chose to say yes, and say yes to you, and say yes to God. And so, what a wonderful testimony of their faithfulness to the Lord and willingness to be wonderful parents for you at that time that you needed it the most. So that's just a wonderful thing. And we all have plenty of excuses to say no to things that God calls us forward to do, and things that he says he wants us to serve in. And there are legitimate reasons sometimes. There are reasons that we certainly have to seriously consider. We have good commitments in life, but sometimes even those good commitments, it's appropriate to say no to those, to say yes to something even better and more meaningful. And it seems that Rich and Ruth did that, and that more meaningful thing was to take you into their home and care for you and love you in that time, which is simply wonderful to hear. So we're so thankful for them that they trusted God even in the unknown future that they were facing at the time. So, Tricia, you had another big moment while sitting in church with your husband. This is later on in life. Tell us about that.
Yeah. My husband and I, we walk into church one Sunday and take our little daughter up to the nursery. And as we come back down into the sanctuary, there's a woman speaking that day, and she worked for a foster and adoptive care agency. And I still remember her name. I can tell you exactly where I was sitting. And she began to speak of the plight of children in foster care. And within seconds of her beginning speaking, I lost it. I mean, completely lost it, like ugly cry, whole body heaving, snot kind of going every which way. And literally the whole time the woman spoke, and I don't know if it was 15 minutes, I literally did that the whole time, just crying, just hearing of this plight of these children. And it just really, my compassion really welled up inside of me. And, I looked down the road, nobody else was having this exact same reaction. And I've learned that when that happens, that's typically God's talking to you. God's got something for you. And so as we left the sanctuary, the woman had said that she had an info table out in the lobby. You could sign up for an info meeting in a couple of weeks. And so my husband and I, as we leave the sanctuary, we're headed up the stairs to pick up our daughter from the nursery. I just sheepishly said to him, "Do you think we should go to the table in the lobby and talk to that lady?" My husband, a man of few words, just turned around and said, "Duh." It was just that clear. It was just that obvious. And so we would step into foster care ourselves. We would sign up. We would go to that info meeting. We would learn about it, and we would begin to start the journey into fostering ourselves. We really just discern that was something God was asking me to pay it forward, what He'd done in my life through the Hedmans. And He was saying, "Hey, will you do that for another kiddo?" And so our family would begin to walk into foster care that would lead to some foster placements and actually would lead to even adoption of one particular child. And can I tell you one fun thing about that too?
Please, yes.
Yeah. So on adoption day, we'd had this child in our care for 3.5 years before we got to adopt her. And that was such a redeeming part of my story. And the whole time we were fostering her, I always thought, if we ever get to adopt her, and you just don't know how those stories will own, I tucked away this idea in my heart that on adoption day, we would surprise my foster mom and we would change her middle name and we would make it match hers. It would be Ruth. We'd combine it with the middle name she had, which was Ann, and we'd make it Ruth Ann because I really just wanted to pay forward that legacy. And so, not only was I fostered, but now I have fostered and I have adopted. And so kind of gives me a little bit of a global perspective of the work we do, and just a lot of compassion on both sides. It's not easy to do either side.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautiful to receive that legacy and then give it to your child as well. Yeah, that's wonderful. I laughed when Tom said, "Duh." Both my wife and I, we've had many moments where no coherent words need to be spoken for us to be on the same page or know what the other one's thinking. And so I thank God that you guys were united in that moment.
Yeah.
So what I love about this part of your story, Tricia, is this shows that you've not just lived foster care personally when you were younger, and you don't just talk about it professionally, but you've walked that walk alongside your husband in your own family, in your own home. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and not easy.
Yeah, clearly, yes. I love, Tricia, how both you and Tom knew becoming foster parents was the right thing to do. You just knew it was the right thing to do. And, that's a honest decision we all have to make when considering foster care. We should know it's the right thing to do, and it always is the right thing to do. That's a clear yes. Whether is it right or wrong, it's always yes. And will it be challenging? No doubt. I think the challenge we all face is simply having the courage to say yes to something as important as foster care. And so I just commend you and Tom for just being willing and eager to do that and prepared to do it. And to me, it sounds like you prepared your hearts and prepared your family even for that big decision later on. So well done.
Yeah, and the little internal dialogue I had with God around that decision was, "Oh man, Lord, I love big." Oh, the thought of those kiddos leaving like that just breaks my heart. I don't think I can do that, Lord. And I remember him just saying back to me, again, not audibly, but in my spirit, "Will you trust me?" And I was like, oh man, I have to trust you with this. Of course I do. But I just want other people to know, it wasn't just a boom, I'm done. I had to think about it and I had to have some conversations with God. But at the end of the day, trusted that He's faithful.
Yeah, He is faithful. Yeah, you're called to be obedient, and you can trust His faithfulness with all the rest of it. Yeah. I've often heard it, to be successful as a foster parent is to simply say yes. That's the first step, is to say yes. What would you say it takes to be successful foster parent in addition to saying yes?
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's being willing. And I think it's relying on Jesus. I hear oftentimes people say, I don't have what these kiddos need. And I say, Yay, you're right. You don't. But as a Christian, Jesus lives inside of you and he absolutely has what they need. You just have to be willing to step forward and say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Tricia, explain to us, what does the trajectory look like for children today in Montana if Christians don't step up to care for them?
Yeah, I think it's really similar to the legacy that I was handed down. I will often say, There, but for the grace of God, go I. And I meet people all the time that, the legacy that they've been handed down is major depression, alcoholism, homelessness, unwed pregnancy, incarceration, prostitution, traffic. I mean, the statistics are so grim. I recently met a gal who aged out of the foster care system, and she turned to me and she said, How has homelessness been for you? And I was like, Oh, you're just assuming that, that's been the case for me. And thankfully it hasn't. But again, that's because Christians stepped forward and chose to. And so, the Headmans were able to graft me into the family of Christ and gave me a new legacy that I carry forward, one of faith. And by doing that, I think of scripture talks about, sin goes to the third and fourth generation. But the Bible says that love goes to thousands of generations. And so, I mean, if Christians don't step in, it's just a really grim path that these kiddos are headed down.
Yeah, absolutely. I often think about how foster care is not just a ministry for today, but it's a ministry for generations to come, and that it has eternal impact. And so you're absolutely right in that. I actually have some statistics here as well in front of me about children who age out of foster care. Aging out meaning children who turn 18, they become young adults, and they leave the foster care system without identity or belonging to a loving family. And so for these young people, boys and girls turning 18, the data is not good for them. It says about 20% of children in foster care will become instantly homeless upon turning age 18. 70% of young women who age out of foster care system will become pregnant before the age of 21. And we know the impact of what that has on a young woman when they become pregnant and have a child out of wedlock. 60% of the young men who age out of foster care system go on to be convicted of a crime at some point in their life. 60%. And 25% of these children don't go on to graduate high school or complete a GED. And 50% of all children who age out of foster care will develop a drug addiction at some point in their lifetime. And these numbers are staggering, really. I don't have in front of me direct comparison to the general population, but these are very high. And if we think about the 26,000 children approximately who age out of foster care, the foster care system around the country annually, we can imagine what this impact really is. 50% of those 26,000 will struggle with some sort of addiction. 70% of the young women will become pregnant before age 21. 60% of the young men will go on to be convicted by a crime. The numbers are staggering, and they're difficult to comprehend. And what's more than that is that this is generational, as we've talked about a little bit already. These children who are in foster care today who are suffering, we know it's likely their parents also struggled with similar things and experienced abuse and neglect in their life. Perhaps their grandparents did. And their children, those aging out of foster care today, their children will struggle with the same things and likely end up in foster care as well if there's not intervention at some point. And so the outcome for these kids is very difficult. But what is that intervention? Of course, it's the Headmans in your story. It's Rich and Ruth saying, I'm going to step in the gap and say no to this generational negative impact in your life. And that's where the good news is, that God is for these kids, and he's provided and equipped the church as the answer for their need. Just like we learn in James 1:27 that God's people are called to care for the orphan and widow in their distress. So the key for us is not to ignore the need and look away. It's to lean into it and stand in the gap for these kids. Tricia, let's drill this down a little bit. What is the need we're asking the church to respond to today for children in Montana?
Yeah, it's real. It's ongoing. Right now, today, there are about 2,000 children in foster care on any given day in Montana. Those numbers are higher than most states when you look at the per capita rate. So the need is perpetual, it's constant. And every day there are more children entering the system. Some are going to come and they're going to need a home for just a few days. Others for years, and some will be like me. They'll need a family for a lifetime. There's about 80 children who age out of the foster care system each year. That means turning 18 without a permanent family. But here's the thing that we know: no child ever ages out of the need for a family. They need someone to adopt them, to offer guardianship, or at the very least, provide a stable, lasting presence as they navigate adulthood, getting their first apartment, walking down the aisle, stepping out into the world. They need a parent to help them navigate that. Each child has their own story, and we get a chance to be a part of that story, just like the Headmans were for me. We get to stand in the gap and refuse to let abuse and neglect define their future. There's a line in a Brooke Fraser song that I love. It says, "Now that I have seen, I am responsible. Faith without deeds is dead." So now that we know about this need, we cannot look away. It is on us to respond, just like Jesus did for us. He had compassion on us and he moved toward us. And we are asking the church, do not ignore them. Come close to their need and respond. And Jesus will help us do it.
So, Tricia, in light of that, if our listeners are feeling a tug in their heart right now, but they're afraid to step forward, maybe they have some legitimate excuses, perhaps, what would you say to them?
Do it afraid. The kids don't mind if you're afraid. I bet you the Headmans were likely afraid, but they did it afraid. And I'm so grateful. So do it afraid would be my encouragement. I also, have to plug Childbridge Services. You're not alone. So when you step forward and when you just take that leap of faith and say, yes, Lord, I hear you calling me to this. I'm going to do it. Not to worry. Childbridge offers this wonderful community of like-minded individuals. And so you'll get access to training. It's trauma informed, it's evidence based. And a lot of our services, they also include childcare and a meal. You've got your own foster parent coach that can really customize and tailor action plans based on specific behaviors that might be baffling you, and really just teaching you how to help a kiddo who comes from a hard place, how to trust, which is a thing to do, but we are here to help you and have all kinds of services available to do so.
It's important to add that Childbridge is here to provide resources and support to not just those who are actively fostering or have already adopted through foster care, but also to those who are initially considering it. So if you're listening to this and you've not yet fostered but have considered it in the past, then allow me to challenge you to not just think about it or talk about it, but to reach out to Childbridge and learn what the next steps you need to take in order to do it. So the question is not whether foster care is the right thing to do. As we discussed, it really is the right thing to do. But the question may be, is this the right season in your life to do foster care? There are very likely barriers preventing you from stepping into foster care. These may be practical barriers, such as preparing your home for a child, to welcome a child in your home, or there may be emotional barriers that just need much more attention. Foster care advocates at Childbridge are experienced and trained to help guide you through those barriers so that you know how to best prepare for foster care and determine when that time is best. And Tricia, I just want to say a quick thank you for you sharing your story with us again today and being vulnerable with us. We are so grateful for what the Headmans did for you years ago, and I look forward to seeing many more foster couples just like them stepping forward in the days ahead. As we just heard, welcoming a child in foster care can change not only their life but their eternity. If you ever felt a tug on your heart to make a difference in a child's life, we invite you to take the next step. Join us for a virtual foster care info meeting to learn how you can open your home and heart to these precious children and allow God to use your family to change lives. Visit childbridgemontana.org/foster to find an upcoming foster care info meeting or share this episode with friends or your church community. Together, we can ensure every child has a loving Christian home.